He stopped at a shabby roadside café for coffee. He didn't expect a 6-year-old waitress, or to meet the daughter he never knew existed. Stephen Marlowe had driven this stretch of road countless times in his youth, back when it was just the quickest way to leave his small hometown behind. Now, all these years later, the same cracked asphalt and whispering cornfields looked different, not because the road had changed, but because he had. At 37, he was a CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the country, with offices in 3 cities, meetings that ran into the night, and a calendar booked months in advance. But on that particular afternoon, something in him had cracked, quietly and without warning, during a conference call he couldn't even remember the purpose of. He had ended the meeting mid-sentence, gotten into his car, and just driven. No GPS. No destination. Just the need to be away from all of it. He had been on the road for nearly 4 hours when hunger and fatigue finally caught up to him. He passed a cluster of aging gas stations and closed thrift stores before spotting a tiny roadside café. It was the kind of place he would normally ignore, a faded building with chipped red paint, a crooked sign hanging by one chain, and windows fogged from the inside. The parking lot was almost empty, and there was no one outside. He hesitated, foot hovering over the gas pedal, but then he turned in anyway. Something, he couldn't say what, pulled him in. The inside was still. Too still. There was no soft background music, no chime above the door. No hum of conversation or clinking of plates. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, casting warm lines across the empty tables. The air smelled like coffee, butter, and something faintly sweet, muffins, maybe. No one greeted him, but the place didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like a movie waiting to resume. He walked slowly to a table near the window and sat down, loosening his tie slightly, grateful for the silence. His body was buzzing with exhaustion, but it was the kind of tiredness that came not from lack of sleep, but from too many months of pretending he wasn't running on empty. He closed his eyes for what felt like a breath. When he opened them again, she was standing there. A little girl, no older than 6, with long chestnut hair pulled into a low ponytail and a red apron tied awkwardly around her waist over a plain white t-shirt. She held a small notepad and a pen in both hands, her brown eyes wide but not nervous. There was something oddly professional in the way she looked at him. "What would you like to order, sir?" she asked, her voice light and clear. Stephen blinked, completely thrown off. For a second, he thought maybe it was a game, that her parents were nearby. He glanced around, half expecting to see a smiling mother waving from behind the counter. But there was no one. "Wait, are you alone here?" "Where's the staff?" he asked, sitting up straighter. "My mom's in the kitchen," the girl replied without hesitation. "I help her. We don't have enough money to hire anyone else. So she cooks, and I bring food to the tables." There was no self-pity in her tone. She said it the way other kids say they help feed the dog or take out the trash. It was just life for her, normal. Stephen looked at her closely. Something about her, her posture, the curve of her mouth, the shape of her eyes, felt strange. Familiar. Like a face he had seen long ago, faded in memory, but not forgotten. "Could you ask your mom to come out for a moment?" he said gently. The girl nodded and disappeared behind the swinging kitchen door. He waited, heart beginning to beat faster for reasons he couldn't name. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the girl's face that had stirred something too deep. But nothing prepared him for what came next. The door swung open again, and a woman stepped out. At first, he didn't breathe. She was wearing a kitchen apron dusted in flour, her hair tied up in a loose knot, a towel slung over one shoulder. Her movements were tired but graceful. And then she looked up. "Stephen?" Her voice cracked on his name. He stood slowly. "Anna?" It had been 6.5 years. He hadn't seen her since the day he boarded a plane to Seattle, leaving behind their small apartment, their shared dreams, and the life they had started to build together. Back then, he told himself it was necessary, he had to make something of himself. She deserved more than what he could give at the time. But he never looked back. Never called. Never wrote. Now she was standing 10 feet away, flower on her hands, her eyes wide with disbelief. And the little girl who had taken his order just moments before? She was hers. No, she was theirs. Anna didn't speak right away. Her breath caught in her throat as if even the sound of his name had stirred something painful, something long buried beneath years of survival and silence. Stephen stood frozen near the table, his fingers resting on the back of the wooden chair, but his mind was racing. The quiet hum of the refrigerator behind the counter and the distant bubbling from the kitchen were the only sounds filling the strange stillness between them. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to find her here, hadn't expected to see her at all, not now, not ever. She looked older, not in a way that made her seem worn out or less beautiful, but in a way that told him life had demanded more of her than it should have. Anna finally moved, her eyes blinking hard as if waking from a vivid dream. She stepped toward him, slowly, carefully, almost like she wasn't sure if he was real. When she reached the edge of the table, she let out a breath she'd been holding and folded her arms across her chest, not defensively, but as if holding herself together. "What are you doing here?" she asked quietly, her voice more steady than he expected. Stephen cleared his throat. "I was driving. I didn't even know where I was going. I just saw the café and stopped." He could see the storm behind her eyes, questions crashing into one another, restraint holding them back. She didn't say anything for a moment, just nodded slowly, then glanced toward the kitchen door where the little girl had vanished. When she turned back to him, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You met Jamie." His heart dropped. The name landed with a weight he couldn't explain. Jamie. The little girl with chestnut hair, a red apron, and steady brown eyes. His mind immediately tried to do the math, but his chest already knew the answer before the years could be counted. He hesitated. "She's mine?" Anna looked at him then, not with anger, but with something far heavier, sadness. She nodded. "I found out I was pregnant just after you left. I tried to reach out once. You'd already changed your number. I was scared. And then I thought, maybe you were better off not knowing." Stephen felt like the floor beneath him was shifting. He sat down slowly, not trusting his legs to keep him upright. His hands trembled slightly on the edge of the table. "I would have come back," he said. "If I'd known." "God, Anna, why didn't you try again?" "Right, anything." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat, her expression tired but honest. "Because I didn't want to ask you for something you didn't choose. You were building your empire, your future. I wasn't going to be the one to derail it. I thought maybe I could do this on my own. And I have." Stephen swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have had to." Anna's mouth twisted into a small, sad smile. "Maybe. But it happened. And she's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Even when I had nothing, I had her. And that was enough." They sat in silence for a few moments. He looked around the café, the worn tables, the mismatched chairs, the faded menus written in chalk on an old board. It was humble. But it was real. It was clearly something Anna had built with her own hands, day by day, likely out of necessity rather than passion. And now, he saw the weight of those years in her face. "Does she know?" he asked, finally. Anna shook her head. "Only that her dad was someone I used to love, but that he had to leave. I never lied. I just didn't give her a face to miss." Stephen stared at the table, his jaw tight. There was so much he wanted to say, apologies, regrets, pleas. But none of it felt like it would be enough. Nothing could rewrite the 6.5 years he had missed. Suddenly, Jamie reappeared through the kitchen door, carefully balancing a glass of water on a tray. She walked over with the kind of cautious precision that made Stephen ache. No child should be working like that, taking on roles bigger than their age. But when she placed the glass in front of him and gave a proud little nod, he smiled, even as emotion gripped his chest. "Did I do it right?" she asked, looking at her mom. "You did great, sweetheart," Anna said gently. Jamie turned back to Stephen. "Are you gonna stay for lunch?" He looked into her eyes and felt something deep inside him shift, settle, and wake all at once. He nodded slowly. "Yeah. I think I will." And in that moment, though none of them quite understood what it meant yet, something had begun to change. Not fixed. Not forgiven. But opened. A door, once locked, now quietly ajar. The afternoon sun had shifted by the time Stephen finished his lunch, casting a softer golden hue through the café windows. The food was simple, vegetable soup with homemade bread and a slice of warm apple pie, but he could barely taste any of it. His thoughts were tangled, running in circles between the reality of the present and the weight of the years he had missed. Across the table, Jamie chatted between bites, unaware of the storm building inside the man she had only just met. Her voice was light, full of the kind of innocence that came from not yet knowing the world could break you. She asked him questions like, "Do you have a dog?" and "What's your favorite ice cream?" with a natural ease that made him want to cry and laugh at the same time. He answered every one of them, his voice steady even as his heart ached. Anna stayed mostly in the kitchen, checking in occasionally but giving them space. He could feel her watching from a distance, her movements careful, protective. She wasn't sure yet what he wanted, and truthfully, neither was he. But one thing had become crystal clear: Jamie was his daughter. There was no room for denial. She had his eyes, his chin, even the same awkward left-handed grip on her spoon. More than that, there was something in the way she watched people, a quiet observation before she spoke, that felt eerily familiar. He recognized himself in her in a way that couldn't be explained away by coincidence. After Jamie finished her pie, she excused herself and skipped off toward a small corner of the café where she had set up a coloring station, crayons, papers, and a few worn storybooks. Stephen watched her for a while, her small frame hunched over the table, deeply focused. The sight of her, so content, so unaware of the emotional earthquake he was experiencing, nearly undid him. He turned toward Anna as she approached with a cup of coffee for herself and sat down again across from him. He looked at her, really looked, and saw exhaustion in her eyes, not just from the day, but from years of doing everything alone. "How have you managed all this?" he asked quietly. Anna shrugged and wrapped her hands around the mug. "One day at a time. I had savings at first. Then I worked nights. Then I borrowed to buy this place. It's not much, but it's ours. Jamie loves it here. She thinks owning a cafe is the coolest thing in the world." Her lips curled into a tired smile. "You did all this alone," he said, more to himself than to her. "I had no choice," she replied, gently but firmly. "I couldn't chase you down. I couldn't raise her and chase your ghost at the same time. I had to choose her. I chose her." Stephen nodded slowly. He couldn't argue with any of it. She had done what he hadn't, stayed, fought, grown up. And now he was the stranger in his own story, trying to step back into a chapter he had abandoned without reading it through. "I want to be part of her life," he said finally. The words came out like a confession, heavy and honest. "I don't know how to fix what I broke, but I can't walk away from her. Not now." Anna's expression didn't change right away. She stared at him over the rim of her coffee cup, as if trying to see through him to the man beneath the polished suit and practiced charm. "She doesn't know disappointment yet," she said softly. "Not really. I've protected her from it. If you say you'll be in her life, you better mean it. Because if you leave again, it won't be me who pays the price. It'll be her. I won't, he said, without hesitation. I can't. There was a long pause between them. Not tense, just full of questions, history, and things left unsaid. Outside, a breeze rustled the trees lining the road. Inside, Jamie sang quietly to herself as she colored, the tip of her tongue poking out in concentration. Anna finally set her mug down and leaned back in her chair. Then you need to come back. Not just today. If you want to know her, it has to be slow. Consistent. Earned. Stephen nodded. I will. I want to. Good, she said. Because she already likes you. And if she starts to love you, she didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. He looked down at his hands, then at his daughter, and something inside him settled. Not resolved, not fixed. But grounded. For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. And that realization scared him as much as it gave him hope. Stephen returned 2 days later. He wasn't sure if it was too soon, but waiting any longer felt unbearable. The image of Jamie's face, the way she had smiled when she asked if he'd stay for lunch, had played over and over in his mind like a song he couldn't turn off. He hadn't told anyone at the office where he was going. His assistant assumed he was taking a mental health day. In some ways, maybe he was. But this was more than mental. This was something pulling at his soul. When he parked in the same gravel lot, the café looked just as it had before, faded, small, tucked into the quiet roadside like a forgotten secret. But this time, it didn't feel like a stop on a long journey. It felt like the beginning of one. Jamie was the first to see him through the window. She ran to the door and pushed it open with both hands. You came back, she shouted, grinning so widely her cheeks flushed pink. I told Mommy you would. Stephen crouched to her level. I said I would, didn't I? She nodded, then grabbed his hand and pulled him inside, chatting all the way about the cookies they were baking and the book she wanted to show him. Anna stood behind the counter, her eyes guarded but soft. She gave a small nod, approval, or maybe cautious acceptance. She didn't say much at first. She simply handed him a clean apron and pointed toward the back. You're early, she said. You need help, don't you? He replied, slipping the apron over his head. That day, he learned more about life in the café than he ever imagined. He cracked eggs, kneaded dough, chopped vegetables with a dull knife and burned his fingers twice. He swept the floor, unloaded milk from the truck, and tried not to mess up Anna's carefully balanced system. Jamie, meanwhile, floated between helping and entertaining, sometimes stirring pancake batter, sometimes building castles out of sugar packets. She acted as if Stephen had always been there. There was no hesitation in the way she handed him tools or corrected his folding technique. To her, he belonged. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, the last customer paid and left, and Anna flipped the sign to "closed." The three of them sat in the back corner booth, sharing leftover slices of pie and wiping their hands on napkins. The silence was companionable, not heavy. Anna looked tired, but it was the kind of tired that came with having done a good day's work, not the kind born of loneliness. Stephen leaned back, stretching his arms along the top of the booth. You run this place on your own every day? Anna nodded. Every day except Sundays. That's the one day Jamie and I try to just be. You're incredible, he said, not as a compliment, but as a quiet truth. She didn't smile at that. Instead, she looked at him with something that resembled pain. Don't say things unless you mean them, Stephen. I do, he said. I've meant a lot of things, I just didn't always say them. She stared at him for a long moment, then looked away. Words are easy. Showing up, that's the hard part. I'm here now. I know. And if you keep showing up, maybe that'll be enough." They didn't speak again for several minutes. Jamie had fallen asleep in the booth, her head on her folded arms, one cheek smudged with chocolate and powdered sugar. Her breathing was soft, even, and full of trust. Stephen watched her, a strange tightness in his chest. He had missed every first word, every first step, every sleepless night. But somehow, he had arrived in time for something else, something still whole. When he offered to carry her to the car, Anna hesitated, then nodded. He lifted Jamie gently into his arms, surprised at how light she was, how naturally her body curled into his like it had done this 100 times. Anna unlocked the back door of her old sedan, cleared the front seat of books and receipts, and helped him settle Jamie inside. She fastened the seatbelt with practiced speed, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face as she did. Stephen stood beside the car, hands in his pockets, unsure if he should say goodbye or ask to stay longer. Anna leaned against the door and looked at him. "She's going to ask questions," she said. "About what this means. About who you are. I've told her you're someone important from my past. But she'll want more. Soon." Stephen nodded. "Then I'll tell her. The truth. As much as she's ready to hear." Anna tilted her head slightly. "And what about your world? The one with glass offices and billion-dollar contracts? What happens when this doesn't fit into your schedule?" He met her gaze directly. "Then my schedule changes." She studied him for a moment longer, then finally, for the first time since he'd come back, she smiled, not politely, not cautiously, but genuinely. "Okay. Then come for Sunday." He blinked. "Sunday? You said it's our day. Maybe it's yours too." Stephen smiled back. "I'd like that." As she drove away, brake lights glowing in the dusk, Stephen stood in the gravel lot a moment longer, watching until they disappeared around the bend. The world he'd built over the last decade suddenly felt smaller, quieter, less vital. What mattered now wasn't the life he had created alone, but the one he had almost missed, waiting quietly at a roadside café, wearing a red apron and calling him daddy before she even knew why. Sunday came with early light creeping through the curtains and a cool breeze slipping in through a cracked window. Stephen had barely slept the night before. Not from anxiety exactly, but from anticipation that gnawed at him with both hope and guilt. He had been many things in his life: an ambitious student, a relentless entrepreneur, a leader, a strategist, but he had never been a father. Not truly. And yet today, for the first time, he was stepping into something deeper than a role. He was stepping into responsibility, connection, and whatever would come from finally facing what he'd missed. He arrived at the cafe 10 minutes before 10, unsure whether to knock or just walk in. The sign still read, "Closed," but the smell of cinnamon and warm butter drifted into the parking lot. He stepped out of his car and approached the front door, only for it to swing open before he could reach it. Jamie stood there barefoot, wearing a cartoon t-shirt and pajama pants with little stars on them. Her hair was messy, sticking up on one side, and her face lit up when she saw him. "You came early," she said, stretching her arms wide like she'd been waiting hours for this very moment. "I couldn't wait," Stephen replied with a soft laugh. She grabbed his hand without hesitation and led him inside. The cafe looked different without customers. Softer. More like a home than a business. A radio hummed low in the background, playing an old song that felt familiar even though he couldn't name it. The counters were clean, the chairs stacked against the walls, and a small table in the back had been set for 3, with mismatched mugs and plates painted with hand-drawn flowers. Anna was in the kitchen, apron already on, flipping something in a skillet. She turned when she heard them and nodded a greeting. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid, and a smear of flour streaked her cheek. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm, without pretense. "Smells amazing," Stephen offered, unsure whether to hug her or simply stay still. She wiped her hands on a towel and pointed to the table. "Sit." I hope you like pancakes. Jamie climbed into her seat, then looked at Stephen. These are the special ones. Mommy puts cinnamon and bananas inside, but only on Sundays. Stephen sat beside her, surprised at how easily everything fell into place, even though the situation was still so new, so fragile. Anna brought over a plate stacked with golden pancakes and set it down in the center before returning for syrup and fresh squeezed orange juice. They ate slowly, laughing at Jamie's sticky hands and her very serious commentary on which cartoon animals made the best pets. Stephen found himself forgetting, for long stretches, that he hadn't been here all along. That he'd missed the early years. That this wasn't normal for him, yet. After breakfast, Jamie ran off to show Stephen her drawing box and insisted he sit on the floor beside her while she colored. He did, gladly, crisscrossing his legs on the rug while she handed him crayons one at a time and gave detailed instructions on how to stay inside the lines but not be boring. Anna watched them from the kitchen doorway, her arms folded loosely, a small, unreadable smile tugging at her lips. She didn't interrupt. She didn't hover. But she didn't leave the room either. Later, when Jamie went into the back to play with her dolls, Anna sat beside Stephen on the worn love seat near the window. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and the world felt still enough to let truths surface. She's never had a man in her life before, Anna said softly, not quite looking at him. Not really. No uncles, no grandfather. Just me and the women at the diner where I worked before this. Stephen nodded, understanding the weight of that confession. I want to be there for her. I know I can't just step in like the last 6 years didn't happen, but I'm not going anywhere. Anna looked at him then, her eyes steady. She's already attached to you. You see that, right? He nodded again. I see it. And I feel it. That scares me, honestly. Because I don't want to hurt her. I don't want to promise something I can't keep. Then don't make promises, Anna said. Just keep showing up. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. I think I can do that. The silence between them was full, but not uncomfortable. It felt like an agreement. A fragile beginning. The kind where trust didn't come from speeches, but from moments exactly like this, shared air, quiet understanding, and the absence of retreat. That afternoon, Stephen stayed longer than he planned. He helped wash dishes, played board games with Jamie, and fixed the cafe's back door latch that had been sticking for months. When he finally left, the sun was already low in the sky, painting the road in shades of amber and rose. Jamie hugged him twice, once quickly at the door, and then again after running out barefoot into the parking lot, just to make sure he felt it. Will you come next Sunday too? She asked, eyes wide with hope. I will, he said. You can count on it. As he drove away, the cafe growing smaller in his rearview mirror, Stephen felt something unfamiliar and steady settle into his chest. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't obligation. It was the quiet rhythm of belonging, earned slowly, built through presence. A rhythm he had almost forgotten existed. And for the first time in a long time, the road ahead didn't look like an escape. It looked like a path home. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm none of them had expected, but all three of them welcomed. Stephen began coming to the cafe regularly, sometimes for just an hour, other times for an entire morning. He never announced himself in advance, and Anna never asked him to. Yet he always showed up, as if his presence was something the place had always needed but hadn't known to expect. He helped in small ways at first, taking out trash, fixing a wobbly chair leg, running to the store for supplies when deliveries ran late. But soon enough, he was behind the counter, pouring coffee, wiping down tables, and learning which regulars liked their pancakes extra crisp and which ones didn't want to be spoken to before their first cup of tea. The customers noticed. Some asked if he was Anna's brother. A few guessed old friend. No one questioned it directly, and Stephen didn't offer explanations. It wasn't about appearances. It was about rebuilding something from the inside out, quietly, without grand gestures. Jamie blossomed under the attention. She began to expect him, but not with anxiety, rather with joy. Her drawings multiplied, many of them now including 3 figures instead of 2. One had a little girl holding hands with a man and a woman beneath a sun with too many rays and clouds shaped like animals. She'd titled it, in shaky block letters, My Family. Anna had found it taped to the wall near the kitchen door one morning and stood staring at it for several long minutes before she finally smiled. It was the kind of smile that came with permission to feel something good without guilt. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, the café was quiet, and Jamie had fallen asleep in the corner with a book still open on her lap. Anna and Stephen sat in the kitchen, drinking tea from mismatched mugs. The steady patter of rain on the roof made the silence between them feel softer than usual. Anna stirred her tea absently and glanced at Stephen, who had rolled up his sleeves and was quietly reading a list of food suppliers. "She trusts you," she said suddenly, setting her spoon aside. He looked up, surprised, then nodded. "I'm glad. I trust her too." "That's not always enough," Anna continued, her tone careful, not accusatory. "She's only 6. She believes what she sees. What she feels. If you disappear again, she won't understand timing, or business trips, or why adults sometimes mess up. She'll just think you stopped loving her." Stephen didn't respond right away. He let her words settle before answering. "I'm not going anywhere. I know it's going to take time before you believe that. But every day I show up, I'm not just showing her I care. I'm proving it to you too." Anna looked at him, her gaze softer than it had been in months. "You are." He leaned back, resting his elbows on the edge of the table. "Sometimes I lie awake thinking about how much I missed. Her first steps. Her first words. Her first cold. The first time she got scared at night. You carried all of that on your own. And I can't change that. But I want to carry the rest. Not to make up for anything, just because I want to." Anna reached for her mug again, wrapping her hands around it. "She deserves that." "She does," Stephen agreed. "And so do you." That statement hung in the air. Anna looked away, and for a moment, Stephen thought he might have said too much. But then she spoke again. "I used to think asking for help was weakness. Especially after you left. I thought the only way to survive was to never need anyone again." "I understand," he said gently. "But needing someone doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human." Anna let out a quiet breath, then looked back at him with a strange, almost reluctant softness in her eyes. "And what if I do need you?" Stephen didn't flinch. "Then I'll be here." In the weeks that followed, things began to shift more deeply. Jamie started introducing Stephen as her dad to customers who asked. She began making up stories about things they did together, even if they hadn't happened yet. "Me and my dad are gonna build a treehouse," she said one day. Stephen just nodded, knowing full well that meant he'd soon be Googling blueprints. Anna didn't stop her. She didn't correct it. And that, perhaps, was the clearest sign of all, that she no longer saw him as temporary. One night, as he was getting ready to leave, Jamie stopped him at the door. "Daddy," she said, the word rolling off her tongue with complete ease. He turned, startled but moved. "Can we have a sleepover sometime? You can stay and read the whole book, not just half." He knelt down to her level, his throat tightening. "Yeah, sweetheart. I'd love that." Later, as he drove home through quiet streets slick with rain, he thought about how healing didn't happen all at once. It came in small choices. Small moments. In pancakes on Sunday, in hand-drawn pictures on the wall, in the way a child said your name like it had always belonged to you. And though he hadn't been there at the beginning, he knew now, without a doubt, that he would be there for everything that came next. Autumn came with a quiet grace that wrapped itself around the little cafe like a blanket. The trees turned golden and rust-colored, their leaves drifting down in slow spirals that Jamie tried to catch with outstretched arms every time Stephen brought her outside. Mornings were cooler now, the air crisp and clean, and the smell of cinnamon and roasted coffee had begun to linger longer in the corners of the cafe. Stephen had grown used to the rhythm of the place, the rhythm of them. His suits showed up less often, replaced by jeans, rolled sleeves, and flour on his forearms. He had become a fixture not just in the kitchen or behind the counter, but in the lives of the two people who, not so long ago, had been memories and strangers. Jamie now ran to him without hesitation, throwing her arms around his waist the second he walked through the door. Sometimes she slipped him folded drawings with stick figures and hearts and wrote, "Dad," under the tall one with brown hair. Stephen had begun keeping them in a drawer in his apartment, but the collection was getting too large. He started pinning them up on the wall beside his desk. They meant more to him than any award or diploma he had ever earned. Anna watched it all quietly, observing from a careful distance. She hadn't stopped being cautious. But her caution had softened into something more like care, like someone who knows how quickly good things can disappear, but is learning to believe they might stay. Stephen saw it in the way she no longer braced herself when he made long-term plans or mentioned holidays. He saw it in the way she let her gaze linger on him a little longer when she thought he wasn't looking. One Thursday afternoon, when the cafe was unusually quiet, Stephen brought something with him, a manila folder tucked under his arm. It wasn't flashy, and he didn't make a big show of it. But after Jamie had gone to the back room to play, he slid it across the counter to Anna, his expression steady and calm. "What's this?" she asked, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Legal paperwork," he said. "I want to file for joint custody." Anna's eyes froze on the folder. Her fingers tightened slightly around the towel, and she didn't speak right away. "Why now?" she asked finally, her voice low, unreadable. "Because I want to be there for real," he answered. "Not just for the good days. Not just when it's easy. I want to be the one the school calls when she's sick. I want to sign her permission slips. I want to show up at dance recitals and dentist appointments. I don't want to just visit her life, I want to be part of it. Officially. Permanently." Anna let out a slow breath and looked at the folder like it might bite her. "It's a lot of change for a little girl." "I'm not asking to take her away," he said gently. "I'm not even asking for anything more than what I've already started doing. I just want her to know it's real. That I didn't just show up for a season. That she has a dad. And that she has two parents who put her first. Always." Anna's eyes softened. She reached out and touched the folder, her fingers brushing his. "She already knows," she whispered. "You're not the one who has to prove it anymore." Stephen didn't reply. He simply nodded and waited. Eventually, she picked up the folder and set it aside, not to dismiss it, but to consider it. "Let me read everything. Let me sit with it," she said. "Of course," he answered. "Take all the time you need." That night, he stayed for dinner. They didn't eat in the cafe but in the small apartment above it, which Anna rarely invited anyone into. It was a modest space, 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, and mismatched furniture that told a quiet story of years spent making do. But it was warm. Safe. Full of life. Jamie made him sit next to her at the small table and insisted he try her famous mac and cheese, which she stirred herself while Anna supervised with a knowing smile. After dinner, while Anna cleaned up, Stephen helped Jamie build a fort out of couch cushions and blankets. She crawled inside and begged him to read a story, so he pulled a tattered picture book from the shelf and began, his voice low and animated as she curled into his side. Anna stood in the kitchen, watching them from a distance. The sound of his voice, the way Jamie leaned against him, the laughter that came so naturally, it stirred something deep in her chest. It was something she had locked away long ago, a kind of hope she had been too afraid to name. Not just for Jamie, but for herself. Later that evening, after Jamie had fallen asleep, Stephen stood at the door, unsure whether to hug Anna or simply say goodnight. She solved it for him by stepping forward and placing a hand lightly on his arm. "You've changed," she said quietly. "But you're still the same in all the ways that mattered." "I wish I'd come back sooner," he said. She shook her head. "If you had, maybe you wouldn't have been ready." There was a long pause. Then she added, "We're getting there. All of us. Just, don't stop showing up." "I won't," he promised. "I'm here. For good." As he walked to his car, the wind carrying the scent of falling leaves and wood smoke, he knew she believed him a little more that night than she had the day before. It wasn't everything. But it was enough. The foundation was being laid, one quiet brick at a time. And for the first time, he felt like this life wasn't something he was stepping into late, it was something he was finally stepping into at the exact right moment. Winter settled in gently that year, not with the violence of snowstorms or ice-laced winds, but with a quiet hush that made the days feel slower and the nights more sacred. The café took on a new kind of charm with twinkling string lights in the windows and the warm scent of nutmeg and baked apples lingering in the air. Customers came in wearing thick scarves and cold noses, grateful for the comfort of hot drinks and the kind smiles that greeted them at the counter. But the biggest change wasn't in the café, it was in the way the three lives inside it had begun to shape themselves around one another, not just like a family, but like a unit, moving in rhythm even when the world outside kept turning too fast. Stephen had become more than a presence. He had become a constant. The paperwork had been filed, and after a few weeks of legal process, Anna signed her name beside his. It wasn't a relinquishing of anything, it was a shared promise. Jamie now had 2 names on the school emergency contact list. 2 people cheering in the audience at her winter play. 2 sets of arms always waiting when she ran through the front door. Anna hadn't stopped watching him closely, not out of suspicion anymore, but out of wonder. Wonder at how quickly the once absent man had become the beating heart of their small world. And Stephen, for his part, treated every mundane task, school pickups, dentist appointments, helping with math homework, as sacred duties. Not because he wanted praise, but because he knew how easily he could have missed it all. And he was done missing things. One evening in mid-December, just before closing time, the café was quiet. A soft snow had begun to fall, making the streetlights glow with a kind of dreamlike softness. Jamie had fallen asleep in the booth near the window after helping her mother pass out cookies to the last few customers. She was curled up in a blanket, her mouth slightly open, clutching a small stuffed reindeer to her chest. Anna and Stephen sat nearby, mugs in hand, speaking in that soft, unguarded way that comes only when 2 people are finally no longer holding back. "I've been thinking," Anna said, her fingers wrapped around her mug, her gaze fixed on the snowfall outside. Stephen glanced at her, the gentle flicker of the café lights reflecting in his eyes. "About what?" "About how we got here," she said. "How strange it is, that after everything, after all the silence and the time apart, this is where we ended up. Not broken. Not bitter. Just, here." Stephen nodded. "I think about it every day. I used to imagine all the ways I would feel if I ever saw you again," she admitted. "Anger, mostly. Sadness. A lot of words I'd never get to say. But none of it happened the way I thought. The second I saw you, it wasn't fury. It was just breathlessness. Like my life had paused, and it finally unpaused." Stephen looked at her, his voice quieter now. "I didn't know what I was walking into. I was running from something that day. I thought I was exhausted from work, from pressure, but really, I think I was exhausted from being alone." Anna smiled, not a wide smile, but one that reached all the way to her eyes. "You're not alone anymore. Neither of them said anything for a while. They just sat there, listening to the hum of the heater, the ticking of the old clock above the counter, and the steady breathing of their daughter nearby. Eventually, Stephen set his mug down and turned to face Anna more fully. "I want to talk to you about something," he said. She tilted her head slightly, curious. "Go on." "I don't just want to co-parent. I don't just want to be the guy who comes to school plays and birthday parties. I want to build something with you. For real. Not because we have a child. But because we have something that never really went away." Anna's breath caught for a second, and then she asked, very gently, "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you'll let me," he said slowly, "I'd like to come home. Not as a guest. Not as a helper. As your partner. As your family. I'd like to marry you." The silence that followed wasn't filled with shock, but with emotion too deep to move quickly. Anna looked at him, her eyes glistening, and she set her mug down slowly before reaching for his hand across the table. "I need time," she said. "Not because I don't feel the same. But because I want to say yes with my whole heart. And I think it's getting there. Every day, it's getting there." Stephen nodded, completely at peace. "That's more than enough for me." A few weeks later, on Christmas morning, Jamie woke to find her parents sitting together on the couch, watching her open presents with sleepy eyes and excited hands. She didn't know about proposals or paperwork. She didn't understand timelines or emotional healing. She just knew that her mom was smiling more than ever, and her dad never missed a moment anymore. For her, it was simple: they were together. Later that day, as snow fell more heavily and the café stayed closed, the three of them played board games and baked cookies in the kitchen, singing off-key holiday songs and dancing in their socks. No one made grand speeches. No one tried to define what this new beginning was. It simply existed, whole and imperfect and full of love. And that, after everything, the years apart, the silence, the almosts and the what-ifs, was more than any of them had ever dared to dream. Not a second chance. A new life. Chosen, together.